So thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Chair.
Well, good morning. Thank you. That was quite a nutshell. Sanibonan, Marweni Dumalang, Pafuetu Nanibosis. Ninjani. I don't expect an answer. Yabo, Umlungo America, Kurumi Sisulu, Kotwa Hai Kakulu. Nabukla Noko, Siakulumi Isinkisi, Kobo Anikulumi Isizulu Kashle. Goedemorgen, goedemiddag, broers en sisters. Ik praat ook Afrikaans, net een beetje. Vandaag ons praten Engels, want ik praat Afrikaans niet goed. Sorry. So, I'm very honored to be with you today to address the topic of supervision. Before I do, I want to reflect just for a moment on a couple of the points that were made. I've been a child care worker for 59 years and a social worker for 57 years. I've been a member of NACCW for more than 40 years. So I've been around a while. This topic of supervision, I find especially interesting. I know that it's a focus of some concern in South Africa as you work on supervision. I've been in contact and working with one of our colleagues, Eddie Tazen, in Cape Town, who's working on a much larger version of a workshop on supervision. And I hope to assist him with that. So let's begin. Could you put my, well, I just say slide to get the next slide? Thank you. I want to talk about what supervision is not, because a common misperception is the supervisor is looking over everyone's shoulder to find out what the person is doing wrong. So supervision is not snoopervision. We're going to look at a very holistic concept of supervision today, and looking at different aspects, which ordinarily are not discussed, and they should be. So I'm hoping that as this presentation moves forward, and the work that Eddie's doing moves forward, that we can have a very holistic concept of supervision in South Africa. Next slide. What supervision is, it's a hand up. It's help and assistance for personal growth and development and so on. So if we think of it as a mutual support effort, we'll be much better off. Next slide. So what is a supervisor? Well, a supervisor is a manager, and we'll talk about that, a group leader, is support for staff, because God knows we need support in the work that we do with the children that we have and their families. The supervisor is a performance appraiser, giving feedback to the child care worker about his or her performance. The supervisor is a mentor. A mentor is more than someone who instructs or tells. There's an emotional component to mentor. It's a person who is perceived and felt to be supportive. And finally, a professional developer, because I know from my own experience, I can remember 59 years ago, my first day as a child care worker was overwhelming for me. But in my career as a child care worker and as a social worker, I have had wonderful, wonderful supervisors who helped me to focus on my professional development as well as my day-to-day work. So professional developer is one of the functions. Slide. So there's a transition that happens because somebody isn't hired just as a supervisor. I would say 99% of the time, the person is coming from frontline worker to supervisor. And this calls for a shift in perception. There's a change in work relationships from peer to supervisor to supervisee, which means that the boundaries change. Now, the boundaries are not, they're not a wall. They're just a definition of roles. And when we become supervisors, we have to realize that what our boundaries are as a supervisor, what the boundaries are of the childcare we're supervising, what we're adding, and we're going to be talking a lot about this, the addition of a knowledge base and the skills of supervision. And I want to be very specific about that as we move through. There's also a shift in position on the organizational chart, and that means additional organizational duties. So when I use the title, Three Phases of Supervision, one of the phases is a management phase. We'll be talking about that. Next slide. The supervisor has to understand first himself or herself, the strengths or weaknesses that we have, because this is we're using ourselves as the tool, unlike the farmer who uses the plow and so on. Our tool is ourselves, and that means that we have to know our tool, our strengths and our weaknesses. We have to understand our role, the job description, and we'll talk about this in a little bit. What our job description is, what the staff are supposed to do, and why they're supposed to do that, how each staff position fits into the entire organization, the unit's role in helping the agency achieve its mission and objectives, and finally, probably most important, the importance of their own role. Good supervision contributes to the development of the child, the professional development of the childcare work supervisor, contributes to the organization. So good supervision is essential to organizational function. Next slide. So what's this knowledge base that the supervisor has to have? Well, some of it is the knowledge base that we have as childcare workers. Human development through the lifespan, knowing child and adolescent development and adult development. I know that in the programs that we have in South Africa, in child and youth care, this is an important component, understanding human development. And in the process, understanding how that development can go awry. So many of the children with whom we deal, as you know, come from dysfunctional families and so on. So understanding human development. Second is educational theory. Now, this is something that it's not unique to supervision, but it's not part of frontline childcare skill. That is principles of adult learning, understanding how it is that adults learn, which is quite different from how children learn. In our work as childcare workers, we are constantly thinking about how the children are perceiving or learning and so on. But as supervisors, we pay attention to how adults learn. Management theory, the effective and efficient organization, and assumptions about human beings. We'll be talking about this also. The effective and efficient organization means that there are certain principles that are well known in organizational theory that will contribute to our supervisory skills. And we'll talk about those in terms of communication. Assumptions about human beings. The assumptions that we make about human beings deeply affect what we do as supervisors. And we'll be talking about theory X and theory Y, kind of an older theory set, but it's a useful thing to reflect on.
It's here.
Sorry?
Can we mute, please? Can we switch off our cameras, our microphones?
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Finally, group theory, the dynamics of group interaction. We already, as childcare workers, we become quite skilled in working with groups of children. But now we're talking about working with groups of adults. our supervisees. Next slide. So here are some examples of the principles of adult learning. And you might ask yourself if this is how you learn best. Adults need a framework, not just information. Adults, unlike children, already have a lot of information. They have a lot of years already. Remember, information is not the same as fact. Information means you know how to use it. Adult learning is tied to attitudes and motivation. The attitude and motivation of the supervisor affects attitude and motivation of the supervisee. I learned this actually in university. It came home to me. I've had some wonderful, wonderful teachers, and I've had some terrible teachers. And the terrible teachers are the ones who had a terrible attitude toward what they were teaching, or a terrible attitude toward the students. So it's important for supervisors to show conviction and enthusiasm for the work and demonstrate comfort with personal feelings and motivations. Anxiety, insincerity, or lack of preparation can't be disguised. If you as a supervisor are anxious, or you're not sincere, or you're unprepared, you can't hide that. As you know, as I know from my experience working with children, we can't hide that from the children. The children have developed a radar. They can read adults so quickly because that's how they've survived. So as supervisors, we have to pay attention when we're working with our supervisees to our attitude and our motivation. Adults have diverse histories and experience, and we have to respect that. I have as you could tell from the introduction, I have a really roller coaster of life history and so on. And the other people I work with come from different experience. So as a supervisor, I have to take into account that background. Adults have diverse primary learning modalities. Some are primary visual learners, some are primary tactile learners. Personally, I'm a primary visual learner. You show something to me visually, I'll remember it forever. If you give it to me in words, I struggle with it a little bit. So this means that as we work with our supervisees, we have to do a combination of things and figure out what modality this person uses primarily. For example, a primary tactile learner is someone who learns hands-on. Now, some of the best childcare workers I've ever known are tactile learners. They get out there and they just know what to do. They know how to put their hands on. I don't mean literally physically, although it could be physical. They know how to actually intervene and work and so on. Next slide. Adults need to participate and contribute to their learning. It can't be one way. It can't be a lecture. I know this from university, as well as from child and youth care work. In classroom, I try to get my students to participate and contribute to their learning by asking them questions and challenging them and so on. So as supervisors, it's important for us to engage our supervisees in critical thinking and learning and questioning. Next, adults are opinionated. Their personal perspective and values are well ingrained. If you want to know what I think, I will tell you what I think, and I hold firm opinions. So when we're introducing new information, we should offer choices rather than trying to force ideas. You can't force an idea onto anyone. However, you can make it look attractive. And finally, adults are problem solvers. They want realistic information and insights that they can apply to immediate problems now. Whenever I talk about this, I remember we had a psychiatric consultant, a psychiatrist, who was excellent, absolutely excellent. So we would, once in a while, we would receive a child referral, and the referral would say, well, the child has Guillaume de Barré syndrome. And we would all look at that and say, what the hell is that? You know, this psychiatrist was able to translate that into child and youth care work. He was able to say, this is what this means. This is what you're going to see. This is how you address that and how you can pick up the symptoms. It's very helpful to have a thorough grasp of the work. Next slide. Supervision can pose a threat to self-esteem. When you tell someone in so many words, what you're doing is wrong, um, this is difficult. Supervision reveals commonly made errors. I remember in my early years as a childcare worker coming to the realization I've just done something really stupid, or the supervisor pointing it out to me. Participants may react very defensively. So people need to defend or justify the way they've done things in the past. We've always done it that way. This is what we did in my family, and so on. The successful supervisor is supportive, not confrontational. We remind people we all make mistakes, but the important thing is not that we make a mistake. It's what we do with the mistake. This is something I remember learning in a very important way, that one of the attitudes I wanted my supervisors to have toward the supervisees is to say to them, look, we all make mistakes. When you make a mistake, we'll just talk with you about the mistake, what you're going to do in order that you don't make that mistake again. Next slide. Assumptions about human beings. Now, this I find to be very interesting. And this is an old theory. You may or may not have heard of it. Douglas McGregor wrote the book, Human Side of Enterprise, and he popularized this human relations model. He said there are two theories about human beings, theory X and theory Y. Next slide. Theory X. Those who hold theory X would think work is inherently distasteful to most people. Most people don't want to work. Most people are not ambitious, have little desire for responsibility, and prefer to be directed, to be told what to do. Most people have little capacity for creativity in solving organizational problems. They make it somebody else's problem. Motivation occurs only at the physiological and security levels. It's only when I need to have this thing, whatever it is, in order to feel safe or secure. And most people must be closely controlled and often coerced to achieve organizational objectives. So if this is your attitude about people and you're a supervisor, you can imagine what the response is from the supervisee. Next slide. Theory Y, however, in theory Y, this person believes that work is as natural as play if the conditions are favorable. So if you hear people say, I really enjoy my job, this is someone who is functioning from this perspective. Self-control is often indispensable in achieving organizational controls. Self-control means not only that I control myself, but I recognize that I'm responsible for myself. I'm responsible for my actions. I'm responsible for my emotions. The capacity for creativity is spread throughout the organization. This is something I learned in a very practical way. I once had staff come to me and say, this sick day policy that we have is not good. We don't like that. And I said, well, propose something. And they proposed a wellness policy. And in the wellness policy, we don't have sick time. We have time available, and you can make requests for the use of that time for things other than just being sick. And that was because I said, you come up with something. They came up with it. They proposed it. They put it through. And by they, I mean the frontline childcare workers. Motivation occurs at affiliation, esteem, and self-actualization levels, not just security and so on. In other words, I'm motivated in ways that have to do with my own development and my own estimation of myself and so on. People can be self-directed and creative at work if properly motivated. I'm laughing because I remember being at a conference once, and somebody asked me, don't you worry about your agency when you're away? I said, absolutely not. I absolutely trust that my people they know what they're doing, they'll do it well, and they'll take responsibility. So theory X, theory Y, you might think about what your attitude is toward people and learning. Next slide. So the first phase that we'll talk about is management. The supervisor is the link between upper management and the frontline worker. Communication ought to be two-way, management to supervisor and supervisor to workers, and worker back to supervisor, supervisor to management. You can't have an arrangement where the upper administration knows nothing about the frontline workers or communicates only down to them and does not receive information back up. The supervisor is the link for that. Next slide. Lou. Okay. So as we think about that role of the supervisor has to be aware of the agency's mission. What's the purpose or reason for the agency to exist? For example, if you're a childcare worker and you're working in a shelter program, emergency shelter program, you have to keep your focus on the shelter. That's your reason for existing. It guides the activities and the decision-making, spells out the mission, spells out the overall goal, provides a sense of direction. All the people who work there, the supervisor should be working with all the people to ensure that they understand the mission of the agency and are distracted by other factors. Next slide. What's the agency's philosophy? Now, I find this to be very interesting. Philosophy. Well, let me tell a story. One of my mentors, I've had many really good mentors. One of my mentors said, if it says widgets on the front of your factory, there damn well better be widgets coming out the other end. Meaning the philosophy is about the way we do our work, not what we say in the poster on the wall, but what we actually do, how we treat each other. I remember I was working in Germany with a group of childcare workers, and we were talking about dealing with very difficult people. And we were talking about philosophy, and I asked one of the people, so what's the philosophy in your agency when a child does something that's really serious? He said, we knock him out. I said, what? He said, we knock him out. I said, what do you mean? He said, we punch him unconscious. I said, isn't that illegal? And they actually meant that. It was true. So philosophy is what we actually do, not the cute little thing we say on the wall. We treat all children as if they're children of God. No, I want to know, what do you actually do? So some examples of agency philosophy, and these are three that we had in my own agency. You can't expect of others what you can't or won't do yourself. You as a child care worker should not be saying to the child something that you wouldn't do, or you can't do, or you won't do. So if you're saying to the child, you should treat others well, and you're not treating them well, that would be a violation of philosophy. People are for caring, not for hurting. And this one I find particularly interesting because I remember we literally taught this, okay? So I remember one day I was walking down the hallway and I looked at the other end of the hallway and there was a childcare worker who was doing something with a child. And I don't know what it was. I don't remember. But the child said to the childcare worker, hey, people are for caring, not for hurting. And I thought, perfect. The philosophy should be something that we live so clearly, and we help our people to live, that the children learn it by imitation, by observation. A third example is we take care of ourselves so that we can take care of others. In that particular philosophy, we're taking responsibility for burnout, for example. We take care of ourselves so that the care that we have of others can take place. These are just three examples of agency philosophy. And you might ask yourself, what is the agency's philosophy? And how do I, as a supervisor, convey that? Now, you might say, well, how do we do that? I can tell you how we did it. We sat down as an entire agency and said, let's talk about how we want to do our work, literally. And this is what we came up with. These are 3 examples. I'm not saying you have to do it that way, but when we do it that way, everyone is committed to it. Next slide. What's the supervisor's management role? The supervisor communicates and clarifies agency policy to the frontline staff. Sometimes the people you supervise may not understand what it is they're doing or why they're doing it, or and so on. The supervisor clarifies that so they have understanding. Remember that principle of adult learning. Adults like to have an understanding of what they're doing. The supervisor's role is to ensure transparency and communication. No hidden agendas. No, you can't have a hidden agenda. Now, you know from your work with the children, the frontline childcare workers, that the children can pick up phoniness very, very quickly. And it's true, most adults can too. In management, you have to have transparency. Transparency means nothing is hidden. Now, there are some exceptions to that. In my own agency, we said all information is available to everyone except personnel information, that's private, and deliberations of the board of directors, so they have the ability to discuss things without having them discussed openly everywhere else. But everything else was available. So if somebody wanted to know, why are we doing that and how much did that cost? There it is. The supervisor can ensure transparency. Third, we keep the focus on client care, respect for the dignity and worth of the person. I find this to be so essential and so on, that the supervisor, the frontline worker, to pay attention to the dignity and the worth of the person. This is so difficult because sometimes this is lost in our cultural attitude that adults have toward children. Every person has dignity and worth. What is the worth of a person? The worth of a person is, that's a person. That's not a thing. Ensuring fair treatment of both clients and staff. One of my mentors taught me many years ago that when you're dealing with any kind of problem, whether it's something between the supervisor and the supervisee, or between the childcare worker and one of the children, fair treatment is essential so that everyone perceives you're going to be treated fairly. Remember, a child once was, we did some kind of a discipline, and another child said, well, that's not fair because when I did that, you did X differently. And my response was, so you are saying you want to be treated exactly the same as everyone else? And he thought about it for a minute and he said, no, I don't think so. Fair is not equal. Fair is fair. So when people perceive they're going to be treated fairly, their response is quite positive. The supervisor communicates expectations. Expectations of the agency, expectations of the children, expectations of the program. And finally, the supervisor provides support and appraisal, performance appraisal. Next slide. The second phase, and this is one that's probably a little more familiar, is problem solving and performance appraisal. The supervisor engages the worker around problems and performance by modeling critical thinking in the problem solving process. So this is not the supervisor hovering over the person and saying, let me tell you what you're doing wrong. It's by inviting the person, engaging the person, in this process. So the person the supervisee comes to the supervisor to the meeting and says, this thing happened this morning. I did this stupid thing, or I don't know, I don't understand what the child did, or I'm not understanding that. And the supervisor helps the supervisee to examine his or her function and to improve it. In other words, the motivation for improvement has to come from the individual saying, I want to do this. But the person won't do that unless the supervisor sets up the relationship so that the supervisee perceives the supervisor as a partner in problem solving. Next slide. So what's the skill set of the supervisor? Is it matched to the job description? Some things are just the part of the work we do as child care workers. So the knowledge base in child and youth care work is essential. Child and family development, abnormal psychology, group dynamics, and cultural sensitivity. Those are 4 things that we as child care workers in our work directly with children are supposed to know and be familiar with. Frontline experience in group settings. I personally know of situations where people were hired from the outside and brought in to supervise childcare workers who were working with really difficult kids, and they had no frontline experience. They had no knowledge of what it was the childcare workers were dealing with. And so the frontline experience it is essential. And I remember when I became executive director, that was an interesting time for me. I became executive director, and we would hire new childcare workers, and they would be in the middle of something, and the childcare worker would say, "Well, you just don't understand," and the other staff would look at him and say, "You don't understand. He's a childcare worker, and his door to his office is open so that you can go in there, and he knows what you're talking about." So frontline experience is essential. Crisis intervention skills. Well, we have crises all the time with the children and with staff too at times. So understanding what crisis is and how to deal with it before the crisis happens, this is a skill set that we do develop in the work we do directly with the children. But in a broader sense, the supervisor has to have a set of crisis intervention skills that have to do with the organization in crisis. The supervisor has to have an orientation to proactive, positive growth and support. The orientation is to support the growth that you see and help and introduce other aspects of growth. So, for example, you see a child care worker, frontline worker, doing something with a child that is quite a creative intervention. The supervisor then supports that. That was a great thing. Let's talk about doing that, and let's develop that, and so on. And finally, the skill set of a supervisor is knowledge of management systems and policies. This is different because now we're talking about organizational management and how organizations function. And this is something that is not part of frontline child and youth care work. I discovered many years ago that in the area of business, there are hundreds of studies of management of how organizations function and what the good organization is, and how policies should be developed, and so on, that we didn't have in child and youth care work. And a bunch of us took that material and began to introduce it into supervision so that the supervisor understood organizations and how they function. Next slide. Another essential piece of this is a good job description. Now, I want to talk generally about job descriptions and then about job description for a supervisor. A good job description, and I talk about a written document, provides the individual performance expectation for each job task. So there are statements that are quantifiable, observable objectives. What does it look like if whatever it is done right? Now, in child and youth care work, you can't possibly list every little thing that people do, but you can list the general functions. Next slide. What does the job description do? It informs the staff of the specific duties, tasks, or responsibilities of the job, as well as authorities. And I put that in boldface because quite often job descriptions do not include the authorities. If you have a duty, you have an authority to perform that duty. A small example would be, let's say, one of your duties is handling the petty cash. Well, one of your authorities is to request the petty cash. So you don't have duties without authorities. Second, it provides a list of qualifications necessary for the position. I used to find this interesting too, because there'd be this long list of qualifications, and you'd say, how do those fit with the job? Because the qualification should be connected to the kinds of things that you have to do. So, trying to think of an example, a bad example. Well, if we say a qualification that's necessary for the position is, I don't know, a master's degree in child and youth care work, then the question is, why at that level? What is it in the job description that requires that? The job description identifies the person or position to whom staff are accountable, as well as those who are supervised. It should say who are supervised. Identify the person or position. In other words, it positions the person in the organization, not only to whom you report, as well as those that you supervise. And finally, it forms the basis for performance evaluation. Now, the labor laws in South Africa are quite different from the labor laws in the United States, but they are similar in the sense that if you're doing performance evaluation, you can't evaluate performance of a person unless that is in the expectations in the job description. There should be a connection there. Next slide. There are two kinds of performance appraisal. One is ongoing, and this is the one that takes place day to day or week to week, engaging the child care worker in a proactive assessment through regular supervision. Now, let me put a little support here for regular supervision. Regular supervision means there's a structure there. It could be regular meetings, it could be group supervision, but it's regular. The worker comes prepared for supervision, and the supervisor assists the worker in problem solving and planning. So you don't have a situation where the worker comes in and sits there and waits for the supervisor to say, here are the problems that you're having. The worker comes in saying, I want to talk with you this week about this problem that I had or this thing that I'm doing, and I would like some help with that. And that will happen only if the worker believes that if he or she has made a mistake, that mistake will be dealt with positively. The worker has to have confidence in the positive support. So ongoing, this is day to day, week to week. And this builds the performance of the person. And the second kind is summative, on a regular, usually an annual basis. Worker and supervisor together evaluate the worker's performance based on the job description, that's the basis, and standard expectations of everyone in the agency, reviewing the professional development plan and forming a new professional development plan. We're going to talk about that piece in a couple of minutes. So the Notice it's the worker and the supervisor together. So typically, the supervisor would draw up an evaluation, and the supervisee, the childcare worker, would also draw up an evaluation of his or her own performance, and then sit down and see how they match or don't match. If they don't match, there has to be a discussion then about why they don't match. Next slide. The goal of a performance appraisal, providing objective appraisal of staff's total job functioning over a specific period of time. How are you doing? Second, identifying areas of strengths and weaknesses and assign job duties. Now, unfortunately, I believe in many supervisory processes, the emphasis is on the weaknesses. But notice it says identify areas of strengths, because you can build on strength. You don't build on weaknesses, but you can build on strengths. And I'll mention an example of that. I encourage my supervisors in my agency to identify, of course, the strengths of the staff they supervise, and to encourage people to take those strengths and to use them. For example, I had childcare workers who were very, very skilled. They were excellent at dealing with crises. And I said, you know what? Why don't we have them do a workshop? Why don't we have them work with others on developing that strength? So we identify areas of strength as well as weakness. The weaknesses are things that we can help the person to resolve. And finally, give strengths-based feedback about performance in relationship to job expectations. Strengths-based means here's your functioning. We're going to take the strengths that you have. We're going to develop those in order to produce a holistic final response. Next slide. Clarifying agency expectations, policies, and procedures as needed. Quite often, supervisees, frontline childcare workers, don't have an agency orientation. They're oriented to the individual child, to the group of children, but not the entire setting that they're in and how that fits with the work they're doing. It develops a plan to address training needs and professional development. This is something that assists the individual to plan professional development, which we'll talk about in a minute. But it also informs the agency what's needed. So, we need to do training of childcare workers and something or other. So the agency has to come up with the funding or the time or the structure to do that. So this plugs into the organization's budget, planning, and so on. And finally, developing a plan for performance improvement. And we'll talk about that very specifically. Performance appraisal should, in the end, motivate staff. At the end, I assume the staff member, the frontline childcare worker, should be saying, you know what, I love my job because I'm growing and I'm learning and so on. I remember people who started, I think, as very weak frontline childcare workers, but as they worked on their areas of weakness and developed strength, over time, they were saying, I really like my job. I don't think of it as work. Remember theory X and theory Y? This is theory Y. I really like the work I'm doing. Next slide, please. Now, these little tips for supervisors. What are reasons for performance problems? Lack of motivation. The frontline childcare worker just doesn't have the motivation. Burnout. Now, there's a whole session I do on burnout, and I would love to do it with you. I did this, I think, a year ago. Sorry? Burnout. You probably have heard the term, but my question is, what is burnout? What is burned out? Think about that for a minute. And if you think about it long enough, you realize what's burned out is motivation. Think about this. If you If you have a staff member, and you're working with really difficult children, and you have a staff member who's burned out, what are you concerned about? You don't know what that person will do because the motivation for the job is gone. Third, outside problems, personal or family illness, problems at home outside of the agency that are affecting the job. A lack of understanding that the task is actually important. Something like having a regular study time for the children who are in school. That's an important piece of the day. A lack of knowledge. They just don't know. Or a lack of skill. They don't know how. So, next slide. We're going to connect this to decisions about training. There may be a clear deficiency of knowledge or a deficiency of execution. Not one or the other. Some staff may have some knowledge about how to do the task, but may not be doing it correctly. Performance problems can potentially include any combination of discrepancy of knowledge and skill and of execution. So when you're thinking about training and you're asking yourself, so what do our people need? When you look around, you have to ask yourself, is the person not performing because he or she doesn't know, doesn't have the knowledge? Or is he or she not performing because he or she doesn't have the skill? Let's go to the next slide, try to explain that. Has the staff person performed this task adequately in the past, but isn't doing it now for some reason? That's not a knowledge deficit. That's a skill deficit. Does the staff person articulate understanding of the dynamics related to the task in conferences or in individual meetings and so on? In other words, does the person express an understanding? And if the person does, then it's not a deficiency of knowledge, it's a deficiency of skill. If the answer to either of the above questions is yes, supervisors should proceed as if there's a deficiency of execution, of skill. Next slide. When should we use training? Training will only help a performance problem if staff do not know how to do the job task. So training is the golden key to performance improvement only if the lack to the performance problem is a lack of knowledge and skill. In other words, you can train the hell out of people, but if they're not motivated to do it, if there is not the deficiency of knowledge, then you're wasting your time. You're wasting your efforts. So one of the ways that you know what to do in terms of training is to pay attention to the supervisory process as it occurs across the whole agency and the feedback that you, as a supervisor or director, receive about what it is that we need. Here are the deficiencies in knowledge that we have in our staff. Oh, well, we have to have X, Y, and Z in training. Here's a deficiency in the skill. Oh, well, here's what we need to do in our planning for development. Next slide. This is one that people have to really deal with. Working with difficult staff, and we've all worked with difficult people. The ways that staff might communicate resistance to the processes that we've been talking about. Avoiding responsibility. I'm not responsible. He is. She is. They are. It's those damn children. It's those other workers. It's the damn director. Flooding supervisors with details. So the person that comes in to talk with you about a problem, and you get a half-hour description of every little tiny detail, which is like you just flooded. You can't deal with it all. Changing the subject. So we start talking about the problem, and suddenly we're talking about something completely different. Being unusually silent. And this usually happens when you ask about something and the person says, I don't know. Now, you've dealt with this with the children you've worked with, I'm sure. And one of the things I used to do with the children, when I knew the child would say, I don't know, I said, okay, I'm going to ask you a question. You can answer anything you want, but you may not say, I don't know. You say anything else, you may not say, I don't know. Because it becomes a block. When the person is silent who says, I don't know, the intention there is to block the work that you do it. That's resistance. Or showing premature compliance. What does that look like? Well, the person says, in effect, yeah, okay, yeah, I can do that. Fine, no problem. Attacking the supervisor verbally. You don't understand. You're never around. You haven't observed what I'm doing. You sit in your office and reading your papers, and you don't really know. You don't really care about what we're doing. So instead of responding in a cooperative way, there's an attack. Pressing for solutions rather than trying to understand the problem. This is a really common one. So I'm a frontline child care worker. I present a problem to you, and you're trying to work with me as a supervisor to understand the problem. And I'm saying, just tell me what to do. Just tell me what to do. And my response to that as a supervisor has been, if I tell you what to do, if I tell you what to do, and you go and do that, and it doesn't work, what do you say? It's my fault. It's my fault. In other words, you're not taking responsibility for the solution. You're looking for the solution from someone else so that you can blame the other person rather than working on it yourself. And finally, claiming that supervisors do not fully understand the situation. And I love that one. People would say, you just don't understand. And I would say, okay, if I don't understand, then you explain to me what it is that you think I don't understand. So I'm sure these sound familiar to you. And I'm saying the supervisor has to become skilled at dealing with each of these in a positive, proactive, growth supportive way. Next slide. Avoid trying to give logical explanations or offer solutions. When a person comes and says, tell me what to do, and I don't understand, the first thing that we're tempted to do is to say, well, this is what it is, and this is what you do, rather than saying, let's talk about this. Let's take this apart. Let's talk about your emotions. Let's talk about your reactions. Let's talk about what's going on inside your head. Identify the form resistance is taking. The resistance, as you can see, can take a number of different forms. Listen to the words and to the underlying message, not just the words, but what's underlying the words. Again, our children that we work with, because of their experience in the world, have learned to almost ignore the words that we use. So sometimes we say things to the child, and it's like we never said it. But the child has learned to pay attention to the underlying message, the nonverbal communication, the feelings, and so on. And so we should be listening to the words of our supervisees, as well as to the underlying message. As a supervisor, I state in a neutral, non-punitive way the form the resistance is taking. Here's what's blocking the work that we're doing. You focus on the feelings of staff, not the content at first. You have to get past the feelings, whether it's being overwhelmed, feelings of unworthiness, whatever it might be, before you can get to the content. Remain silent. Let the staff respond to the statement. I had wonderful mentors, as I said, and one of my mentors said, "Can you remain silent? How do you remain silent?" And he said, "You look at the other person, and you don't have to stare at the person, but he said, look at the bridge, bridge over the nose, and remain silent for a moment or two. Let the staff respond to the statement first of all. Give them time. And finally, acknowledge and deal with the resistance and the feelings. We can deal with any feeling. We can deal with any resistance. Let's just put it out on the table And we'll talk about it. Next slide. Then, when you've done that, you determine what's needed. Specific training, focused supervision, remediation of some kind, or termination. Now, there's something that we're, as a supervisor, that's the thing that most people are afraid of to do. I have to tell you that in the many years I was a supervisor, director, and so on, I think I terminated one or two people. And it was after a process, and, it wasn't a sudden thing. It wasn't, you're fired because you did that. It was, here, this is the end of a long process, and we tried to remediate and so on. But it's very difficult for a supervisor, I believe, to think about terminating someone, because it sounds so final and so negative. But for some, it's a very good thing, because it'll help the children you're dealing with, but it may help the person too. The process of being terminated is not an easy one, but you'd learn from it. Now, I have to tell you, technically, this is confession time. In my first job as a childcare worker 59 years ago, I was terminated from the job. I was terminated because, and it's a long story, but I was terminated because there was a conflict between me and my supervisor. This is going to sound awful, but my supervisor was a nun, and I nothing against nuns. I've had wonderful nuns I've worked with, but this particular person was very angry at me, and for complicated reason. And finally, not she, but her supervisor said to me, "Well, next Saturday is your last day." That was it. But I learned from the termination. It wasn't comfortable, it was icky. But I learned when I went on to the next job what to do in terms of taking care of myself. We could have a whole workshop on termination. But the point is that at some point, the supervisor determines what's necessary. Specific training based on a skill lack, focused supervision based on the need for more training in problem solving, remediation, figuring out what to do that would make the situation or the physical setting better, or termination. Next slide. So now when we're talking about supervision, what are the barriers to good supervision? And these are not a secret to you. A heavy workload. So a frequent discussion I've had over the years has been, how many supervisees should there be to a supervisor? And people come up with magical numbers, no more than 6 and no more than 9, and so on. That's not the answer. All the research tells us that the workload of supervision to the supervisor to supervisee should be related to the nature of the work. So in the psych hospital, for example, one of my duties was to be a group therapist with this group of patients. We had done the most severely regressed patients in this group. Well, we had, I think, 6 or 8 patients in the group. We had 6 staff, because we needed to do that because of the intensity of the work. I've worked in settings where it was as a childcare worker, house parent, you might say, and I had 13 kids in my unit, in my house. So it really depends on the work that you're doing. But if the workload is too heavy, too intense, that's an organizational barrier. The lack of resources needed to do the job. Resource could be time, space, support from administration. Third is inadequate supervision of you as the supervisor. Negative results for good performance. So that someone does a good performance, but really doesn't get any recognition for it. That's an organizational barrier. Or a positive result for non-performance. This person is, I don't know, hitting the children and gets a positive response. That really worked. that's a barrier to good supervision. And finally, a lack of positive reinforcement for performance. Are we recognizing good supervision and reinforcing it? There were many times in the agency when I was executive director when I would realize we did not have the money to give good sized raises. And so I said to my management staff, we have to find ways that we can support what people are doing, whatever that is. Send them to workshops, give them some kind of recognition. In one instance, I remember paying for a person's family health insurance. We have to find ways of reinforcing. It isn't necessarily always just giving more money. Next slide. The final phase. How am I doing on time here? Am I okay? I guess I'm okay. The third phase is professional development. The supervisor assists the supervisee to build on strengths and remediate weaknesses through a proactive plan for growth. Now, I bold-faced and put in red the word proactive because this means that as a result of the daily, weekly, annual performance appraisals, we come to a conclusion of what's needed for professional development. And that becomes a plan for growth. Next slide. A professional development plan is an annual product based on the proactive involvement of the staff member, assessment of areas for development, and available resources, time, money, agency support. In my own agency, not just I, but we made a decision that this area would have a heavy emphasis in budget. And so if somebody, I would say, let's see, I had, at that time, I think I had about 20 child and youth care workers, frontline child and youth care workers. I think we supported 8 of them in their bachelor degree programs. That was just part of their development plan. So it's based on the annual performance review by the staff member and the supervisor. Remember the joint and the identification of needs. And it sets specific behavioral outcome objectives. So if we say, okay, as a result of all these assessments in our performance assessment here, the summative one, we've identified a need for education and crisis intervention. Then there should be an outcome objective, which then becomes part of the next annual performance review. So the next time they come around, we pull out this professional development plan and say, okay, let's see how we did this past year in your professional development. And let's take what we have now and form another development plan. So it's an ongoing annual process. And the person is always in the process of development. I considered it to be a successful program if my frontline child and youth care workers advanced in their knowledge and experience, advanced in their positions sometimes. I remember one person came to me, a frontline child care worker came to me once and said, I don't make enough money. And I said, okay. So in order to do that, what would you propose? And he came back and he proposed an entirely new program in which child and youth care workers worked in crisis intervention in the community with the police and others. And I said, fine, go do it. And he went and did it and almost doubled his salary. If people have a sense that they're growing, they're getting something, It isn't always money, and it isn't always prestige and power. It's just the perception. I'm growing, I'm developing. This is an absolutely essential piece of the work that we do as supervisors in developing the organization. And it's one of the things that makes supervision so essential, so important in organizations. Next slide, and I think that's the final. Yes, that's the final slide. So how am I doing here?
Thank you, Nick. Thank you. You've done well. We still want to listen more.
I could talk for hours. You know me. I can go babble on.
Yes, yes. But you say that was your conclusion. We will then open it up for questions and comments. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's give Professor Nick Smiar another round of applause. Because as I could see there in the chat box, there's someone that said she has learned quite a lot in the middle already of what you have shared. And as I was also listening, we could see that you were able to share, from your experience and a lot of practical examples.
I just saw a question flash across the screen. Can a social worker supervise a childcare worker?
Okay.
Well, yes. However, the best situation is that a childcare worker supervises a childcare worker simply because the childcare worker understands the context, the skills set, the setting and organization. Now, I'm both a social worker and a childcare worker. But if you called me in and said, well, we want you to supervise this childcare worker, I would have to call on my childcare work skills. Social work and childcare work are not the same. They have a different focus. They have a different end point. They have different developmental goals and so on. Is it possible? Yes, but that social work supervisor would have to be very sensitive to child and youth care work. Sorry, I saw something else flash on the screen and it went away. Another one?
This one just said it's very informative. Okay. Are there any other questions you could just pose? You see very other questions?
I saw one that said, can a qualified
let me read for you. Okay.
Can a qualified child care, I forget what we call that. We have registered child care workers, and we have, what's the other? The more common is not registered. Somebody help me with the term. Auxiliary? Auxiliary?
Yes, we've got the professional and auxiliary child and youth care worker. Yeah, that's two categories.
So the question was, could an auxiliary child care worker supervise a registered child care worker? I'm not going to step into that political one. I know that that's one of the struggles we have in South Africa, that we have these two levels, shall we say, and we're trying to work out the registration part. I know that we're trying to develop a wider training base for child and youth care work at a university level. I know there's the DUT degree, but I think that there are other efforts to develop more. I don't know the only answer I have to that question is, can an auxiliary supervise a registered child care worker? I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. Depends on the person, I guess. I'm sorry, did I cut off someone?
Sorry, Nick, maybe we could ask Donald to come in from the professional board side on that issue. Okay. Donald, would you like to comment?
Yes, thank you very much. It's a very interesting question that, I find that everywhere I go, I am asked this question. Nick, the good thing with South Africa is that the South African Council for Social Services Professions, using its professional board for child and youth care work, in which also the professional board for social work sits,
Yes, I
have
know.
developed the regulations. And the regulations clearly states that social workers must be supervised by social workers, and child and youth care workers must be supervised by child and youth care workers. So if a social worker is found to be supervising a child and youth care worker, that social worker can be reported for the reasons that you have stated, that it will be better for a child and youth care worker to be supervised by a child and youth care worker. And because we are a profession that it's developing and there is a lot of work that still needs to be done, we believe that it's important that we don't confuse the practitioners.
I'm going to interrupt you because I'm very sensitive to that. I understand in detail. I've had many conversations, and I didn't want to step into the middle of that. I wanted to answer the question just from the non-technical standpoint. But I remember many years ago when I began in child and youth care work, all of the supervisors were social workers. And we, child care workers, began to insist, no, only child care workers should be supervising child care workers. And that developed. We developed that so that by the time I became an executive director, all my supervisors of child care workers were child care workers. And in fact, I, as a child care worker, was the executive director of an agency. So it's a process of development. And I didn't want to step into the middle of the political process in South Africa. It's political, it's financial as well, people for their degrees and that sort of thing. And I know that there are efforts to develop the degree programs and to move more people into it. Can a social worker attend training in child and youth care work? Well, I'm living proof of that. It depends on the attitude of the social worker, I think. I don't want to say I'm a humble person. I probably am not, but I have colleagues who are tremendously humble social workers who have worked with child and youth care work and learn from child and youth care workers. So can a social worker learn from child and youth care work? Absolutely, and should. I think the social workers and the agencies should be taking the same workshops. That would not hurt them at all. Let me make a quick comment. That the PowerPoint presentation I used, I had asked Zeni Thumbadu to make sure that was available to anyone who wants it. I don't own my materials. You can steal anything you want, and put out my email. So if you have a question, you can contact me. I just wanted to share that. That's what we should do with child and youth care workers. Everything should be available to everyone. Sorry, did I cut off anyone? I'm seeing questions as they pop up on the screen, so I know there are other ones. I should open the chat. There's the chat. Okay.
Sorry, Nick, we just want Zeni to also comment.
Okay.
Yes, Zeni, welcome. You may continue.
Thank you very much. I apologize for coming in late. I had another lecture on, but I am here now. And I think that this discussion on the chat box is a very interesting one. And it is a one that's at the heart of the issue of supervision quite often for child and youth care workers. And I want to ask the question and see what people think. If we had child and youth care workers who at that time couldn't do their degree because we didn't have the degree available. Some of them have been at DUT, some of them, maybe DUT offered the campus-based, but UNISA did not offer the degree. And they chose to do social work because they wanted to advance, but they've got a qualification and an experience in child and youth care. And the only reason they really did a degree in social work was because that was the only opportunity for developing. And they would want to come back into the field. And they come in with the practice of child and youth care. Should we be open to, first of all, bringing them back because they're originally our childcare workers, and start utilizing them in places that we don't have enough leadership and degreed leadership, because that seems to be the challenge we have in the field. I'd like to hear what people feel about that. These are child and youth care workers who got a social work degree.
I'm watching the chat.
I think I see there's a hand there. Maybe there are people who would like to respond verbally. They've got Annie, Mabua, and Joseph. Let's start with Annie.
Oh, hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Professor. I am a social worker with a background of childcare. I started off as a child and youth care worker in a CYCC. Yes.
Another me.
And I think I identify more as a child and youth care worker than a social worker. And I think my background and my experience in childcare is very helpful in my social work practice as well, because it gives me background in terms of where the child is coming from, in terms of the childcare principles. I'm able to integrate my childcare principles. And in our panels, I'm able to reach out to children much better, because I do not sit in my office and have my counseling sessions in the office. I believe in the life space work and working in the moment, going out there, breaking the cycle of conflict. So I believe that bringing childcare workers who are now qualified as social workers will be very much valuable, because they bring the best of both worlds and integrate the two. And in my organization currently, I'm able to bridge the gap between the two professions. So childcare workers are treated equally as social workers. And what happens is that social workers cannot do certain tasks, and childcare workers are able to come in and provide. When we do our IDPs as social workers, childcare workers plays a very important role in terms, because they understand the framework, the what we call it, the cycle of courage. Childcare workers are very experienced in working with the child cycle of courage, whereas social workers are not trained in that framework. So how do you now develop an IDP if you are not well trained in IDPs? So that's my opinion. Thank you.
Annie, you are truly another me, and you have said it much better than I have said it. So I say ditto to everything that you said.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Let's give Joseph a chance, and thereafter Shaz Nakolo. Okay, Joseph.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I will differ in of what the speakers spoke before me, because where we are in the Free State is quite different in terms of the social workers, as well. You spoke about the supervision. So now I would prefer a child in this care worker to be the one that's doing that work, because like when we are working with the social workers where we are seeing in the Free State, especially in Elbourne, it's a small town, it varies. It's also coming with clashes at some point where, like the lady spoken before, the IDP as well as the cycle of courage, because we have seen that it brings, I think, mistrust or fear from the social workers that we may be taking their jobs. So that's my opinion based on that one. I think I would prefer challenge care workers rather than bring an individual bring with both knowledge, because of what I have seen. Maybe I may be convinced otherwise, but so far it's something that I don't think yet. Okay, thank you.
Interesting point, Joseph. And I want to emphasize something that you said. The particular area Annie said this also, the particular area that it belongs to us as child care workers is the life space. We are experts in the life space. And frankly, speaking now as a social worker, I would say social workers that is not an area of expertise for social workers. We think about the context, but the child care worker is the one who's actually in that context and can provide all kinds of insight that the social worker typically cannot do. So our particular territory is the life space. And so when we talk about Circle of Courage, for example, that's based on life space. So thank you, Joseph.
Okay. Thank you. Shaz, you may speak. Unmute. Joseph, you can lower your hand, please.
Good day, colleagues. Thank you so much for the opportunity and thank you for the presentation, Prof. It was very informative. Mine would be, I think the first thing we need to look at, as much as Zeni says, majority of child and youth care workers leave the field because there was no academic development at that particular time, it being there was no degree. But I'll be honest, as one of the people who has a diploma in child and youth development from DUT, I currently am studying out of the profession, and I'm not proud of that. But I think we need to get it straight on some of the reasons why we are actually shifting from the child and youth care profession, because it's not just about having a university only in Durban and not having one in Gauteng. However, it's the fact that the progression in child and youth care work has been very stagnant, and it somehow brings a burnout and a discouragement to us as child and youth care workers, which ends up pushing us to other professions. So personally, I'll agree with Joseph. Once a person shifts out of the child and youth care work profession and maybe decides to do social work or decide to do a PGC in education or something else, I would suggest that they continue with that. And we have people that are child and youth care workers who possess, whether it's a degree or it's a master's degree, to continue in the field, because it shows that they are still interested in the field. Because bringing me as a person who's currently studying, maybe I'll just say, for example, a person who's studying social work, bringing me back, as much as I've got a dual experience, but for the fact that I left child and youth care, it means there was something that I was not happy about within the profession. So I'd suggest that we get people that are still interested in child and youth care, because it might also cause challenges for the people that will be supervised by me as a person who has a dual, I don't know what to say, but dual positions or dual qualification, because I might mix things up. I might have to be looking things as within the life space of a child, but I end up talking about casework or group work, and then it just clashes things. So mine would be, let people who continue to study child and youth care continue with the supervision and the higher roles, and people who have moved out of the profession, let them continue within whichever field that they've moved to. Thank you so much once again.
Well, thank you, Chaz. Let me mention that for me, and in our situation in the States, childcare workers that many years ago, I got my MSW as a plumber's license. It was a way of establishing credibility and academic support for what I was doing. But all along the way, I identified myself as a childcare worker and a social worker. And people would say, you can't. I would say, why can't I? Why can't I? It has to do with how I identify myself. And I can separate the two and I can join the two, as you have tried to do also, Shaz. So I understand the point that you're making. I think that in South Africa, we probably have quite a few people who were frontline child and youth care workers and have moved on to other things. And we should be calling them back. We should be calling them back to contribute to child and youth care work. And I hope that NACCW is able to do that. I'm not sure if that's what you were intending, Shaz, but that's how I'm interpreting part of what you were saying. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask,
I
I see there's two names that want to speak. Can we just come up with our question, not too long, because we're running out of time as we're moving on. We don't want to lose other people. Nzamo, and then I see Joyce.
Nzama.
Thank you, Program Director, and thank you, colleagues, all protocol observed, and thank you, Mr. Nick, for the presentation. I think the question that is currently is very interesting. Maybe from my side, I'll come with a different view. I might sound maybe controversial, depending on terms of how you comprehend whatever I'm trying to communicate. I think personally I do not have a problem with the dual profession, being a social worker or a child and youth care worker. But colleagues, I think we need to be mindful that both professions are highly regulated, and there are also functions that comes with it, with certain legislative that's also govern both profession. So by me saying that we can bring the colleagues with a bit of an experience from care with their current profession in child and in social work. However, if we are bringing that person with experience, are we bringing the experience or are we bringing the child and youth care worker? Then one might ask us, who is a child and youth care worker? Remember, I highlighted that both professionals are highly regulated. So according to the current regulation, regulating child and youth care worker, a child and youth care worker says it's a person registered under the section 18A of the Act. So if that person that is we are bringing forth, is he a registered child and youth care worker? Remember, for you to be a registered child and youth care worker, you need to possess a certain level of qualification. So for you to be a registered child and youth care worker, if you are not possessing that qualification and you are not registered, with your experience, post or prior social work degree or qualification or experience, you are not a child and youth care worker. Yes, you were practicing child and youth care worker, but right now, if we are referring to a child and youth care worker, we are referring to someone that is registered, regulated, possessing certain qualifications for him or her to be recognized as such. So if that person comes with an experience but zero qualification, that will be so wrong of us to take that approach, because that person is not a regulated individual. So we cannot even begin to call him or her a child and youth care work. But if the person comes with a degree of social work and experience of social work, plus a degree of child and youth care work and experience of child and youth care work, we're good to go. And I think with that dual registration, then the person needs to assume the responsibility in terms of that particular post. If he is or she is appointed as a child and youth care worker supervisor, then he should be then allowed to perform such functions as a child and youth care worker supervisor with a bit of background from social work, and knowledge or experience can be used or can be integrated in terms of how you use it. But at the end of the day, my emphasis is on the registration parts. If you are not registered, then you cannot call yourself a child and youth care worker. Thank you, sir.
Oh, thank you, Sophia. Why don't we go ahead to Joyce and then maybe Alfred, if we can.
Yeah, we need to conclude. We need to conclude the debate, people, that we're not here actually to discuss the registrations and that. We want to come back to the issue of what is supervision. So I can ask the last two speakers just to be brief so that we can summarize and close. I see a lot of people are leaving already. Let's give Joyce a chance and then Alfred.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joyce. I've done social science in university at University of the Free State. I was majoring psychology, criminology, and sociology. I agree with Anne with regard to social worker. Social worker, they undermine child and youth care workers. And on the other hand, we need each other to help these kids. So that's my concern.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you. Alfred?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a very important discussion that you have started, Nick, in terms of supervision. And I just want to agree with Nzama that we must be very, very careful that we guard this field very jealously in terms of who enters and who does what in the field. We cannot be allowing people to come into the sector who's not registered, as what Nzama said. So we must be very, very careful what we say, where we say, so that it doesn't create confusion in the field. Because people come and listen and hear something, and then it runs out and creates a total different picture of what is being said. So we have to be very, very careful. Let us guard our field zealously and make sure that we build this profession to be recognized. Because I always say this, the day when a child care worker can supervise a social worker, then I would say yes, vice versa can work. Until that day, we remain in our separate lanes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Alfred. The last speaker that we're going to allow, and then we will ask Nick to summarize, it's Ndumiso.
Ndumiso, are you there?
Hello.
Yes, we can't hear you.
Hello, am I audible?
You're audible
Yes.
now. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Firstly, I would like to say to the Prof, thank you for the very insightful presentation. I'll I'll start with what Annie and Ushezi and Zama said. They hit the nail on the head. It's another discussion. It is what we are currently facing. In a nutshell, in this country, in South Africa, our profession is slowly moving, and the bulk of practitioners are on auxiliary level, and it's a hassle. It's very difficult to get up there. Then coming to the actual presentation from the professor. Professor, I'm looking at the attendance, the people attending. You'll find that we are 160 something for organizers. Then we left with 150 something. Maybe in that 150 something, you'll find that maybe there are 4 supervisors. Okay. Now my question is, how frequently, how normally to have these such workshops with the supervisors? Because you'll see the attendance here. Mostly it's child and youth care workers, and the topic or the session was on supervision. And you find that in some workplaces, these things, their supervisors are doing the total opposite of what you were presenting to us. So my question is, how normally to have such engagements with the supervisors? Okay, especially on one slide you spoke of professional development of child and youth care workers. Thank you.
Ndumiso, I want to make a distinction here. Be very careful. Child and youth care worker or child care worker is a professional title. It can also be a job title. So in the organizational chart, it might say child care worker, and then above it, it'll say supervisor. That supervisor may also identify by professional title. So even when I was executive director of the agency, I would say to people, I'm a child care worker. That's my professional title. My job title is executive director. So you have to kind of be aware of that. We don't want to assume that child care worker always means frontline worker. As a professional title, a child care worker can be doing any one of the jobs in a in a childcare setting. Just a small point, but one I'm very sensitive to. I remember having to correct people when they would assume that I had moved away from the front line, therefore I was no longer a childcare worker. Yes, I was, and I am. So just a small point. I realize how complicated the situation is right now in South Africa because of the regulations and the efforts to try to, establish degree programs and so on. And I hope to be part of the solution to that. Recognize that it's going to take some work and some adjustment and some flexibility, maybe from the council. I don't know. Donald can talk about that. But I stand ready to help in any way I can. Technically, I cannot be registered as a social worker. I'm sorry, as a childcare worker in South Africa because technically I don't have the qualifications that the council looks for. But I'm a childcare worker. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Nick. We're going to ask Donald then to summarize as there are anything perhaps that we didn't miss there in the chat box or something. Donald, if you could come in before we then do the vote of thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairperson. I am not going to take much time and summarize, considering that we are starting to lose people. But I feel that what Nick has provided to us today, it's very important. The issue of supervision, it's a buzzword now, both in government and in the NPO sector. And there is a process underway by the Department of Social Development where they are looking at the framework that was developed by the then Professional Board for Child and Youth Care Work, as well as for social workers. So it's a framework for the social service professionals. And we are hoping that the department is going to ensure that they do proper consultation. But as NACCW, we understand that government processes take long and they may not be able to reach us at the time when we need it most, because supervision is needed now. We are aware that many people who are in positions of supervision, they may not have been properly trained or not trained at all. You are just appointed and you are expected to deliver. And that is where we can very much find a lot of damage. And we believe that sessions like this, as short as they can be, they at least give you an idea of what is expected of you when you are appointed in that position. And if ever workshop come at a later stage, at least you will be knowing what is right and what is wrong in supervision. And because as you supervise people, it's very easy that you can damage them. And we hope that with this session that Nick has provided, you will be mindful when you are supervising. You are likely to also understand what you know and what you don't know when it comes to supervision. So that come workshops that are delivered, it could be a few days workshop or a longer period workshop training. You know what to ask, you know what to introspect within you to say, this is what I have been doing and this is what I have learned from the short webinars that are organized by the NACCW. And I also want to indicate that we do not do regular workshops on supervision. Every month has got something that we identify as a need for the sector. Of course, if we have more people who are saying you want Nick to come back again, we are going to go back to Nick and ask if Nick can come back in the next few months. But Nick, thank you very much for, and it's not my role to thank you, but I want to say that thank you very much for connecting with the the South Africans, and because all what you were saying to us actually was speaking to the work that we do on a daily basis and the difficulties that we come across daily in our work. So Mr. Chair, I know that I have not summarized because I don't want to spoil what Nick has presented to us. And I just want to recognize that every word that he said to us, if we keep that, it will help us in our supervision. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you to our director.
Thank you, Donald.
Yeah.
Let me just, first of all, I'm honored. I'm honored that you invited me to join you today. I'm honored always to contribute to our association. And the only thing I can say, I have a suggestion for a future topic, if you wish. I would love to do something with you on ethics. Ethics has been a focus of mine for quite a few years now. And I would like to talk with the childcare workers about our code of ethics in South Africa. So let me conclude by saying, Ngiyabonga kakhulu bayadanki. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Nick, that you are already giving us some food of thought and direction for going forward. I'm just going to ask our Deputy Director, Zeni, just to make a few announcements, and then we will call on our Deputy Chairperson, Fiona, to do the vote of thanks, please. Zeni, if you could just come, are there any announcements that we need to take note of?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, Nick, just to say for a very good presentation. I didn't hear the whole piece of it, but I've seen your PowerPoint, and thank you. And I thank you also for that debate and the challenging issues in the field for it being unearthed. Just a good piece of news for the field is that Donald and I were on a task team today on a strategy which is led by the Department of Social Development. This is a ministerial strategy. We would have announced it before, for the deployment of social service professions in schools. Now, this is an opening that is coming for us. And a lot of the issues in that conversation, in that meeting, was also about how are people going to be supervised? Because, of course, educators can't supervise child and youth care workers. And social service professions means social workers and childcare workers. And of course, Donald and I looking at how do we protect the field in this opening so that we have all our strategies in place. So just to say that seems to be moving forward. And we're just really excited about the opportunity that would come with that. Donald, maybe you could put down on the chat box, but you recently went to a meeting with IDC, and they said that there were bursaries that child and youth care workers could apply for individually on their own, because many people in the chat box are saying we need the necessary qualification, we need the bursaries. And if that door is opening, maybe we should make sure that that is accessed by child care workers as well. And Elvin, just to say that we have two people that we've approached for our next upcoming webinars. One I had announced before is Jenny McGrath from Edmonton University, the Child and Youth Care degree there. She will come to talk to us on childcare practice. And we also have discussions with Martin Sabri from CYCNet to actually do a session on CYCNet. How can we access the range of information that's out there and just take us to a presentation? So those are two potential presentations. Both of them are waiting to be confirmed, and that will be then hopefully the last Thursday of the coming month. Thank you.
Thank you, Zeni. And then we just want to remind all those that are members of the NACCW that we will have our BGM on the 22nd of October. It will be a virtual BGM, but we have asked those that nominations for chairperson is available, and the nominations close on the 31st of July. So we ask that you please kind of attend to that for our BGM that will be on the 22nd. Can I ask then our Deputy Chairperson, Fiona Baiglot, to just do the vote of thanks for us?
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm grateful that after 166 people, we still have 123 on and watching till the end. So well done. Just to acknowledge in my few minutes, Nick, of course, you're a pleasure to always listen to the vast amount of knowledge and expertise and the beautiful real examples that you give us all the time. Helps us to put a lot of things into perspective and to contextualize all the theory that you give us. So we really appreciate this power-packed presentation. A lot of us, as you heard, it's a burning issue, supervision in the field right now, and understanding all the different dynamics related to supervision is coming up in every organization, I think, on how we're managing supervision. Do we have the right people supervising? And are we making sure we're meeting the regulations? Always a big one. So I think all of that got touched in this afternoon, and it's a start of a big conversation. I think that is a burning conversation that we need to take forward, perhaps in our recommendations with NACCW, to create another platform to talk more on this. Because we need to help others who are battling around supervision and support them through the process as well to get to where they need to be. So yes, very, very insightful, and also appreciate the fact that you're always at our beck and call as NACCW, always there to come in and support us, getting up so early this morning to be with us. We appreciate it. And we're grateful for the opportunities we have to learn and grow with you and from you. And then to acknowledge NACCW, of course, for creating the opportunities for us to be in these webinars with lots of different speakers who have value and add value to our profession. We really do appreciate this. And just to all our attendants today, we appreciate all of you for coming out in numbers, sitting in your watch parties, and supporting us in these activities and these webinars that we're creating space for. As Zeni said, there is a lot more conversations we want to have in the children's sector with you. And of course, you have a bonus of getting CPD points as well. So please do make sure you join more of our webinars. With that, we want to just acknowledge and say thank you to every single one of you for being here this afternoon. We appreciate the time you put in, and knowing it's a busy afternoon everywhere, still staying on for the full 2 hours or 2.5 hours to be part of this. The debate is very, very interesting because it brings out many different challenges that we're all experiencing in the field. And of course, we need to, when we leave here, remember we are not against each other. There's a lot of coexistence in the multidisciplinary team between different professions. And so we need to appreciate each other's roles a bit more, understand and be more aware of each other's roles, and find a decent working space where we're making sure as different professions, we're supporting what we're doing for child and youth care profession, and more importantly, of course, for the child that we're supporting throughout of it. So thank you. With that, I want to just again warm thank you to everybody for being here. Donald for always being there and initiating and putting everything together and the planning with the rest of your team, and to Elwin as chair for coordinating this and overseeing it as facilitator. But just to end, acknowledging you, Nick, and thanking you for always being there for NACCW and for our child and youth cares and our children in this country. We are all valuing your feedback, your support, and your expertise. Thank you again.
Morning, Ashley. Top seats.
Thank you very much, Nick. I don't know if you've got you already saying goodbye, or if you've got a last word from the famous man. Okay. Thank you, everybody, and may you have a good afternoon further. And we acknowledge Nick's proposal that we should also put on our theme of ethics going forward. We have our webinars on a monthly basis, and as we're going forward, we will also attend to that.